Today on LA Currents, the tides are changing in the battle against the pandemic. Dr. Laura Kokinda and RN Joanne O'Brien join us to discuss ways to keep yourself safe, mentally and physically. Next up, in June 2020, the Los Angeles mayor signed Executive Directive 27, which started a new path for the city towards fairness, diversity, and equal opportunity. We take a look at where the programs are today and what city leaders think ED 27 will do for Angelenos. But we begin today with the story of LAPD officer Robert William Stewart. Over 120 years ago, a great injustice happened to one of the first black LAPD officers. This year, the Los Angeles Police Department took steps to honorably correct the record.
Los Angeles was a beacon on the hill for so many, including black people that were migrants. Los Angeles is a place, as a black person, you could come and you could actually do well. You could do better than you could do in the South. LA offered promise and hope to someone wanting to make a better life. This was a land of opportunity. When I think of Robert William Stewart, I think of where he came from, what he overcame.
Robert William Stewart was born a slave in Kentucky in 1850. He worked his way across the United States, and in 1889 was appointed one of the first two African-American police officers in Los Angeles. And he was probably also one of the first two police officers, African-American police officers in the state of California.
He came to Los Angeles and was able to achieve this very monumental achievement in the history of Los Angeles and in our state. And really, when I think back nationally, here's a person who was born as property belonging to someone else, and he comes to Los Angeles, and then he becomes the first black officer to enforce the laws of the state of California and the city of LA. And that part just blows my mind when I think about it. The disadvantages that he had to overcome to do that.
Stewart came on at a time that nobody ever thought an African American would be a police officer. So we talked about somebody that is like a Jackie Robinson. He would be the Jackie Robinson for law enforcement.
Robert William Stewart went on to have, at least for 11 years that he was on the force, a very impressive record. He was a policeman's policeman. He went out of his way to help fellow officers. He went out of his way to help the citizens of Los Angeles.
And then it was pretty much all taken away from him through really no fault of his own. Robert Stewart was dismissed from the Los Angeles Police Department by the Police Commission after he was charged with raping a white teenager while he was on patrol. And there was no indication of what happened to him, so I decided to look into it and started pulling on the thread, and it turned out to be a very long thread.
He comes across her late in the evening. I believe there was a curfew at that time for young people. I think he inquired of her about being out at that time of night, and that was pretty much it. That was his only conversation with her. She then fabricates later, we don't know really why, but she fabricates the story that, he raped her.
Officer Stewart was immediately arrested.
And at that time, when an officer was charged with anything of significance, they're relieved of duty.
Stewart got a raw deal. He was not given any chance to present any defense to the police commission. The first trial was a hung jury. The vote was 7-5 to acquit him. The district attorney decided to retry the case, and when it was retried at the end of December 1900, he was acquitted in 40 minutes.
Once he was acquitted, the Board of Police Commissioners refused to reinstate Officer Stewart.
He never was able to get his job back.
He worked as a laborer primarily until he was 70 years old, and then the last 10 years or so of his life he worked as a janitor.
It has taken 120 years for us to recognize that an injustice was done to Officer Stewart.
For over 100 years, we didn't know about this guy. And how does that happen? How does his story get buried? And here we are in 2021 trying to make it right.
What does it mean to us today moving forward to ceremoniously reappoint him, which was done yesterday by the Board of Police Commissioners, allowing him to retire in good standing?
I was so pleased that all of the commissioners recognized that this was the right thing to do.
Having the police commission vote to restore Stewart undoes what their predecessors did 120 years ago.
Just by virtue of what Mike Moore was willing to do, it's like, I'm going to make this public. We're going to do what we can here to correct this and make it right. We're going to reinstate him. We're going to honorably retire him. He's done his part.
We have righted a wrong, a social and historical wrong that can only be explained by systemic racism at that time.
When I was 27 years old, my great aunt blurted out the great family secret that my father was Jewish. And I subsequently learned that when he and his sister went to Point Furman Elementary School in San Pedro during World War II, they had to run home from school every day because the other kids called them dirty Jews and threw rocks at them. So I might not be black, I might not be descended from slaves, but I have some personal feeling for what he went through.
We're still dealing with this 10,000-pound elephant in the room called race. Race played a factor in how he was treated then, and race plays a factor as to how black people and other people of color are treated today. Yeah, what happened to Robert Stewart makes some certain people feel uncomfortable, and it should. So it's important for the city of LA to embrace that part of its history, just like we embrace the achievements of successful black men and women in LA's history. We have to look at history in the context of all of its parts and pieces. And we can't just look at those pieces that make people feel comfortable, because it's not a true depiction of reality. And it doesn't allow for, true conversations.
Uncomfortable aspects of the past should not remain buried. They should be brought to light, and to the extent that lessons can be learned from them, that should be done. So if this helps stop anything like that from happening again, brings other events from the past to light, encourages other research, makes our history more known, because what happened in the past is why things are the way they are today.
There's no denying that if Robert Williams Stewart hadn't opened that door, me and legions of other black officers, including one who would become the mayor of this city, Tom Bradley started his career at the Los Angeles Police Department. That gave him his foundation for public service, and then he went on to become mayor. If it wasn't for Robert Williams Stewart's success in that position for 10 years and proving that a black man could do this job, I wouldn't be here. He was the first. He opened the door. So every single black officer on the Los Angeles Police Department that has ever been owes him a debt of gratitude.
He is someone that we should be proud of. And I hope that this, in some small measure, is just a glimmer of what can happen in our city if we all come together.
It's a story of redemption. It's a story of somebody that thought bigger than what his circumstances allowed him to be at the time.
People in the city should know that Robert Stewart was a good man. He wanted to protect the citizens of Los Angeles.
The city of Los Angeles has a wonderful opportunity if it chooses to do so. And that opportunity is to begin to uncover its history at its best and at its darkest. And it just shouldn't stop at Robert William Stewart. There are Latinx people in the city who have done phenomenal things. LGBTQ people in the city who have done phenomenal things. There are Asian people in the city who've done phenomenal things. There are women who have done phenomenal things. And I think, we need to start telling those stories.
As we hit the 1-year mark of the pandemic, it's important to keep up to date on your health. Luckily, Dr. Laura Coquinda and Medical Services Administrator Joanne O'Brien stopped by our studios for a frank discussion about mental health in the time of COVID. Well, the pandemic landscape changes daily, and along with some of the frightening news, there is hope on the horizon. But we still have a lot to consider, both physically and mentally. So I'm delighted to welcome to LA Currents today RN Joanne O'Brien and psychologist Dr. Laura Coquinda, both from LA City Medical Services. Nice to have you both with us again.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
All right, well, obviously the safer at home restrictions are becoming looser and looser, and a lot of businesses are open, a lot of opportunities to go to restaurants, but there are still precautions we should take. What are some things we should consider before we actually just run outside and do whatever we want to do?
We have hospitalization rates, death rates, and positivity rates going down. So that's why we can open things up a little bit. So when you go out, you still need to do all of those same public health measures, such as wearing a face mask, washing your hands, keeping that social distance. All of those things still matter. And when you wear a mask, it needs to be over your nose and your mouth.
There has been such a resistance to wearing a mask. There's a psychology to that. Why are people resistant to wearing masks? What is it that makes somebody fight back for something like that?
Well, there's a lot of different things at play. One, culturally, America is a place of great independence, which is awesome, but also we don't necessarily like being told what to do sometimes. Individually, people might have some anxiety about the pandemic still, and not seeing masks, not putting one on. It's a way of sort of distancing yourself from what's really going on. It's a bit of denial. People just assume, I don't know anybody who's had this, it's not going to happen to me, and they hope that that continues for them, which unfortunately it doesn't for everyone, but those are some of the factors at play.
But at this point in time, it's been scientifically determined that masks are one of the greatest ways for us to protect ourselves, and now we're even talking about double masking. Is there a reason to double mask, and is there any kind of physical issue that is caused by wearing a mask or double masking?
There is no reason to not wear a mask unless you have some medical condition, such as you have to have oxygen all the time, and then even you should still wear a bandana, because the alternative is getting COVID-19, which could be deadly. In terms of a double mask, and it sort of gets back to the resistance, any mask is good. Let's just start with one, and if everybody would wear a mask, it would stop the transmission by a lot. And if we could sort of stop that, that would help and give us time to vaccinate.
Let's chat vaccine for a couple minutes here. Lots of different types of vaccines. Do they vary wildly, or are they basically all the same mechanism coming from a different source?
The two vaccines that are approved for use right now are the Pfizer and the Moderna, and they're relatively the same. Everybody's sort of heard the mRNA, which is a messenger RNA, and what they did is made a synthetic protein that makes the spike, which we all know is sort of characteristic of this virus. So it teaches your body, or it fools your body into making antibodies, which are the proteins that help you fight infection. So when your body, if you do get exposed to that and you do get sick, your body knows what to do and will fight off the infection.
There's no live virus in these vaccines.
None.
This is just a protein.
Correct. For people that are frightened about a vaccine, I just challenge you to be curious, read, look it up. There's just, go to reputable sites. And talk to your provider, get more information so you feel comfortable.
You actually got me a really interesting site, vaccinatecalifornia.com or .gov, I can't remember, and I forgive me for
VaccinateCA.com.
It was great because you just put in your zip code and it gave an enormous array of information for multiple counties about who has what, and it's contemporary, it's being kept current. So, I'm glad that those kinds of resources are coming up. Yeah. There are a range of reactions to the vaccine, but what are like the standard things that one would expect to feel after the first dose and then after the second?
The first dose, you might have a sore arm, feel a little achy, might have a small fever. The second dose, you're going to have a little stronger reaction. It's just like, because this is novel, it's new. So when this is introduced, your body kind of goes, well, I kind of don't know what this is and I don't feel very well. But the second time you get it, your body's like, okay, I know what this is. So your immune system is a little stronger. So those are very normal reactions. That means your body's doing exactly what it's supposed to do and it's making antibodies. So you might feel like you might have a fever, you might have the chills, you might feel achy, headache, sore arm. Those are all very normal and just part of getting the vaccine.
When does it cross over to this isn't normal, please, I need to talk to somebody pretty quick?
If you continue to have real severe symptoms, really high fever, you start coughing, I would absolutely call your doctor.
Is there like a window of time?
I would say if this went on more than a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, I would call your doctor.
Right, and I'm sure there might actually be some psychological responses to getting the vaccine too, because it, as you said, it's novel, it's new, and we're all trying to do the right thing, but there's a little fear factor going on here too.
There is, especially when people see headlines about the few reactions that have happened, which is not abnormal for vaccines or medical treatment in general. But you go and you wonder, is this going to be me? There have been some people who have had to do their deep breathing and sort of sit there after the shot to make sure they check in with their body. They're concerned about something, but then they realize, the reason I felt short of breath is because I was anxious, and that was what happened. But and also with people getting the side effects from the shot, initially I know that's been concerning to a lot of people until they recognize that it means the vaccine is working, and then they start to dissipate and it goes away, and they're very happy then that they've gone through the process. But it takes a little mental preparation.
Are there self-check things that we should be doing to make sure that, because it's hard to see yourself. It's hard, I can see, oh, you're not doing well, but how do I know I'm not doing well?
One thing that everyone is suffering from, whether you realize it or not, is burnout. And not because necessarily you're working so hard, which is what we used to think burnout meant, but it could be burnout from being at home with our spouse or our partner or our children, or burnout from being home alone, or burnout from being the one who has to go and face the pandemic day after day in a public service role or other necessary roles. So burnout comes with irritability, trouble sleeping, low energy, withdrawal. All these things might be signs of that. So it's good to keep an eye out and see if our behavior's changed, how we're coping with it, also what we might be drinking to cope with it. That's another thing that has been an increase in alcohol use lately. So all these things are good to keep tabs on.
Well, if people are really interested in finding out what's going on in LA, I imagine, as you said, there's lots of websites, but what's the website in which we can reach out?
I think it's corona/virus.la.
And it keeps getting more and more and more information going on.
So if you Google that, and they keep it current, it's got information about testing, vaccines, statistics in terms of what the city's positivity rates are, and it's very informational.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being such incredibly strong advocates for the right things to do and clarifying information. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate you having us and giving us the opportunity.
The first line of Executive Directive 27 reads, "Our city is in pain, and we are hungry for change." We're joined via Zoom from several city leaders to discuss ED 27 and how Los Angeles is starting to change from within.
Mayor Garcetti signed Executive Directive 27 in the summer of 2020 to study and promote racial equity in the city of Los Angeles.
Executive Directive 27 that Mayor Garcetti signed on June 19, 2020 was really a revelation for the city of Los Angeles. It was a statement of a commitment to racial and ethnic diversity, to create inclusion, and to create equity throughout the city.
Why do we need it anyway? What purpose would it fulfill? When you take a look at the executive directive, the very first sentence speaks to the issue. We have a city that's been dealing with pain, and there is a hunger for change. You might say, what change? Things are nowhere near as bad as they used to be. Well, that is a perspective that some might hold. But I think we can see over the past year, with many of the social issues that have taken place, this past month, with things that took place in Washington, D.C., that even though change has happened, change has come slowly, and change has not come consistently. So Executive Directive 27 is saying we really need to aggressively, passionately deal with this change.
This executive directive establishes a racial equity officer and racial equity plans within each city department, a racial equity task force, and a citywide chief equity officer, who is actually Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley.
Executive Directive 27 is needed in Los Angeles because the data over the years has shown that members of certain racial and ethnic groups historically are not fully and fairly recruited, hired, promoted, or retained in a manner that is equitable to all.
In African American Heritage Month, we look at the data, we say, well, African Americans are approximately 10% of the population. And then when we look at the data in terms of public contracting, we see that they are 0.3% of those who get the contracts. That's just one example.
And so as a department, overall, we're somewhat almost dismal in the gender, because we're at 78% male, 22% female. If we aspire to be 50-50, we have obviously a long way to go.
Since Prop 209, apparently what it was attempting to solve got worse. Contracting opportunities became fewer for certain groups. Work opportunities became fewer for certain individuals. So whatever it was attempting to fix did not get fixed. Numbers with respect to participation for minority and women-owned businesses have gone down.
Executive Directive 27 is not designed, or is it expected, to take something from one group and give it to another. This is really about we as a city family looking at what is fair, what is equitable.
27 allows us to do the right thing. It allows us to do the right thing. And so for that, it is a courageous piece of public policy that does not take away from the effort that 209 seeks. And we have to remember, 209 never specifically said, you cannot hire an Asian American. It never said you cannot hire a Latino American. You cannot hire a woman. You cannot hire an African American. It just says that you're not forced to hire them. We want to create an environment and a culture where people want to do it.
The personnel department is also partnering with the mayor's office to assist in creating a study of the history of racial equity at all levels of citywide employment. And this is really, I think, revolutionary, because it will give the city the opportunity to understand where we've been. What is the real truth about the balance of racial equity in terms of who's been invited to roles of management, who's being hired, and where people are placed. This history and this historical effort will help us to paint what should the future look like. We have an idea, but you can't really know where you're going unless you understand where you've been.
Mayor Garcetti is making clear that we are going to do more than just talk about these issues. We're going to be about racial equity in the city of Los Angeles.
So it helps us not only in terms of the jobs, at who works with the mayor, who works in the Department of Public Works, but it helps us, on the other hand, with those who are able to get a construction contract to repair sidewalks, to help build the 6th Street Bridge, and other kinds of publicly funded construction and other projects. So that is the beauty of Executive Order 27. It will allow Los Angeles to be an example to achieve inclusion.
Not only does it help us to acknowledge past wrongs and inequities, but it also is a call to action to ask each department head and the Department of Personnel to take action and do something. What can you do in your department that will make a difference?
One of the things we're very proud of is our partnership with the historically black colleges and universities. And that has helped us with other city departments go to these colleges with recruiting teams to really reach out to engineers who are at these universities, and they can become engineers for the city of Los Angeles and ideally for the Department of Water and Power.
And when we look at, for example, engineers in the city of Los Angeles, that is an area where we have done an outstanding job to assess our needs to include communities. The African American community is among those that we have targeted to help to increase opportunities to get information to be more included.
You know, I fully ascribe and believe in the mayor's vision. I share in that vision, and I'm so determined to have it be the case. You know, we in LA San have a connection, a direct connection to the civil rights movement of the 60s led by Dr. King, in that it was Dr. King who came to the support of what had been striking sanitation workers in the city of Memphis. And, you know, they were fighting for wage equity. So Dr. King came to support them and highlight their cause. That gives us a unique link to the movement of the 60s, the civil rights movement, which was the beginning of bringing to the surface and to full open daylight the struggles of then African Americans. And of course, we know that also applies to other people of color.
Combined with Executive 27, our Renew program will turn equity into real action for workers of color in our city. Companies that sign the Renew Pledge commit to the following 6 things: to have 30% of their workplace for African American and Latino new hires, 16% of Black and Latinos in leadership, 100% Black and Latino pay equity, 14% of total vendor spend with minority-owned vendors, and 12% of their marketing or business development spend. And then number 6, to double the contributions as it relates to racial equity causes. The pledge is measurable. The pledge is real. People can, put hashtags on their website and say, we support equity and we support justice. But we want to see what's on their payroll. We want to know how people are being treated in those workplaces. Do they have abilities to move up in the companies? Will they have pay equity? So it is really important for us, as it relates to looking at the Renew Pledge, to thank the mayor for his leadership in launching this in 2020.
We all have something to strive for, and this gives us a directive to say, hey, this is top priority. Let's get it done.
We're better when we're reflective of everyone and not just some of everyone. And so when you think of Executive Directive number 27, think of it as a commitment to change of hearts and change of minds, so that all will have an opportunity to participate in what I would argue, because I happen to be a native Angelino, one of the strongest and greatest cities in this nation.
We seek not just simply diversity, we really truly seek equity.